Welcome back. It's the Scaling Secrets podcast, and we're going to be finding out today about what it means to own it, to have that ownership mindset from Carrie Siggins, who is the CEO of StoneAge. They are a highly successful manufacturing and technology company based in Colorado. Kerry has been recognized as EY Entrepreneur of the Year and Colorado's CEO of the Year. She's a dynamic speaker, author, and influencer in the business world. She has the Reflect Forward podcast. She has CarrieSiggins.com. She has the Ownership Mindset book, a handbook for transforming your life and leadership, and StoneAgeTools.com. So we're going to find out what Carrie's all about how she has this employee ownership model in her company and how that's achieved some amazing things, and how we can learn from her and have her guide us in kind of the next step in our own business evolution and scaling secrets journeys. So Carrie, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here too, Robert.
Glad to have you. And so I did my best here to type up the audience and tell them all about you, but in your own words, like what makes you stand out? What has you focused, passionate, excited to get up out of bed in the morning?
Oh gosh. So I love disruption. Our company, we make industrial cleaning equipment, high pressure water jetting equipment. So high tech squirt guns on steroids. Our products keep the supply chain running, and it's a very, very old industry, kind of dinosaurs. We are in oil and gas and petrochem and food processing and a lot of places where maybe innovation isn't happening. But I am passionate about innovation. And so I've really been looking to using technology to make industrial cleaning easier, to make it safer and more efficient, so that all of these manufacturing facilities that manufacture the things that we use every day are operating smoothly and as efficiently as possible, and that the people who use our products go home safely every night. So I love disruption. I love big ideas. I love doing things differently, which StoneAge definitely does things differently. And so that's really what I'm all about.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to jump into some of those things that you do differently. And just to get my head around this concept, like you see the viral videos where someone takes a power washer and like washes the concrete and like it's like good as new. But then I hadn't realized that with all this big like machinery and all this industrial stuff, that needs to be cleaned as well. And so, I mean, help me understand, like, what are the devices? What's the product?
So we make nozzles that go on the end of high pressure hoses, and big robotic positioning systems and hose driving systems. So our products clean sewer pipes, clean pipes in refineries and petrochem plants. It cleans conveyor belts in food processing, where it gets all crusty from manufacturing chips, for example, or French fries, for example. It's used to clean the surfaces of ships that are coming in from the seas, to clean off barnacles and get rust removal. So really industrial applications that are very, very high pressure. So your pressure washer that you use at home might be between 1,000 or even 500 PSI to maybe up to 3,000 if it's a really big one. Our tools start at 2,500 PSI and go up to 40,000 PSI. So these are only used in heavy industry, and it cleans basically anything that you would find in a manufacturing facility. And so, yeah, that's why we're a big part of keeping the supply chain running, because if you think about it, as you are making crude into gasoline, or taking something and making a certain chemical with it, or processing food, or the automotive plants, right? There's all kinds of opportunities to clean, paint booths and things like that. All of that has to be cleaned and cleaned well to be able to keep the manufacturing process going. So that's the part of the industry that we really serve. So I call them high-tech squirt guns on steroids, because we are making robotics now. So we have a fully autonomous cleaning system that cleans heat exchangers, which are in every single manufacturing facility. So it's a lot of fun. It's a very, very niche industry, but incredibly important.
Amazing, very cool. And so I had no idea this even existed, right? You say it's very, very niche, and but you're accomplishing amazing things. And so, how did you even get into this? What's sort of your origin story? Out of all the things you could have done with your life, why this?
Yeah, this is not part of my master plan. I will say that, but I'm so grateful that I came to StoneAge. So I grew up in Colorado. That's where we're based. But I wanted to get out of Colorado, moved to Texas after I graduated from engineering school, and got myself into a little bit of trouble. I had substance abuse issues in my 20s, and I hit rock bottom when I was 27 years old, and I had to come back home to Colorado to rebuild my life. And when I got here, I was looking for a job, and StoneAge was looking for a general manager. And even though I was grossly underqualified for the role, I applied for it because I had studied mechanical engineering. I had worked in a big manufacturing operations, much, much bigger than what StoneAge was at the time. And I thought, I might be able to do this job. And if I don't, maybe it's my foot in the door to another position within the company. And I met with the founders and the management team, and they decided to take this massive risk and hire me to take over the company. And that was 18 years ago.
Wonderful. So you stretched yourself a little bit and
Yeah.
you said, well, hey, there's this opportunity for me. I really want it. I am going to do what it takes to get it. And
Yep.
so what was it like actually like doing it? Like you say, it was a little bit of a out of your comfort zone to get this job, but then now like you start on day one or month one and you have all these responsibilities, things to figure out. What was that like?
Yeah, it was more than a little outside my comfort zone. But because I like doing big things and I do everything big, I just threw myself into it. And it was interesting. The very first project that I had was moving the company. So we had just built a bigger headquarters. It's still in the town that we are in now, and we needed to be able to move in a couple of months. And so that was the very first thing that I did, and it was actually a perfect project because it was really important. It was a lot of work. It had to be done, but all of the rest of the team was doing their daily work to get product out the door to our customers. And so that's the first thing that I did. I moved our entire manufacturing operations and headquarters operations from one location to another. So it was fantastic because it allowed me to get to know everybody and have something to sink my teeth into that wasn't part of like the day to day. And so it was a safe place for me to learn. And that's what I did. I looked at it as just a learning opportunity. I asked a ton of questions. What do you think? How should we fix this? I really looked at myself as a partner, rather than a person who's going to come in and say, well, this is what we need to do to change. Because let's face it, I didn't have that experience, and I knew I didn't have the credibility, even though I could see things that needed to be improved. So those are kind of the two first things that I did was I got to move this operation, which was a great opportunity to get to know everybody and do something big and important. And I asked a ton of questions.
And those are two important lessons that it like let's say you didn't have that kind of moving project and it was just like slow getting into it. It's a little bit like directionless, but you have this kind of like short-term project, you
Yeah.
have the added stress, you like there you have a goal, you have a mission, there's things that you know you need to do, and you figure out a lot of things quickly. You kind of have no choice but to meet with these people
Yeah.
and have these conversations. And then I also like how you kind of used your inexperience as an advantage there, right?
Yep.
You asked lots of questions. And so like what else do you think you did correctly in those early years? Like what are the kind of like the lessons or the pillars as far as like your leadership and management style? Like what do you think you did very well?
I think I built relationships really well. That was incredibly important. We were a tiny little company, like 8 million in revenue, 30 employees. So it was easy to build those relationships. But that was really key, not just with my employees, but with also the founders. I was too inexperienced to know that a founder to professional management, although I don't know that you could have called me professional management back then, that those transitions are really tough and often fail. But because I was so focused on learning and building relationships, and building that trust, I think it helped me become more successful. And then and so then once you have those relationships and you have that trust, then we just started trying new ideas. So when we needed to fix something, I said, well, why don't we just try it this way? Because we had a lot of, well, this is how we've always done it mentality in the company. And so instead of making a change scary, it was like, well, why don't we just try it? Like, why don't we just dive in and let's just see if this change brings anything on? And so I really tried to just break it down into bite sized chunks so I didn't overwhelm anybody with a pretty major transition that we needed to go through to be able to scale. Then the 08, 09 crisis hit. And that was actually probably the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it was a lot of luck that pulled us out of it. I kept us really focused on the core. What are we really good at? That's what we're going to invest in. And everything else we're going to stop so that we can make sure that we make it. And that proved to be a really good decision and built a ton of credibility because even though 2009 was painful, we came out 2010 and grew like 35%. And so because we just focused on the core and we just took these small bite-sized chunks of change, I think that helped really set the stage for what my leadership was going to be and not overwhelm people with a new leader, because the founders had been running the company for 28 years before I had come in. And so, that's a hard transition to be able to make and implement change within the company.
Okay, so I'm keeping this in my head here. So you develop these relationships with your team, and then that led to trust, and then that meant that you could get to little bits of change through
Yep.
experimentation without being too
Yeah.
drastic. And then when the 08, 09 crisis hit, you said, okay, well now is the time to like really take that inventory and focus on what our core is, what we're
Yep.
really good at, so that way we can kind of stay on mission, stay on track. And so you mentioned a few times about there are these founders already in place for decades, but my understanding is that you like led some kind of a revolution, if I heard you correctly. And so there's like this employee ownership model. So
Yeah.
what is that all about, and what kind of change did you enact in this company?
Sure. So before I came to StoneAge, we were employee owned, but it was different than the way we are now. John and Jerry, our two founders, are very forward thinking human beings and generous human beings. And they decided they had wanted to share in the success of the company. And so they started selling shares to employees. And when I came on board, employees had probably about 30% of the company. Not from them, it was just all dilutionary. They were keeping their shares. And we kept growing that until we had bought about 40% of the company. But the issue was is that they're now, even though I've been running the company for a decade, or over a decade at the time, they were getting into their late 60s and said, okay, who really owns this company? Yes, we've been buying shares, but there's no real structure for buying you guys out. And yes, a machinist who has been buying stock for 20 years might be our largest shareholder, but he doesn't really want the responsibility of owning the company if something happens to you. He likes the return on investment, and he likes the feeling that he gets from earning more than just a paycheck here. And so that's when I really pushed them to consider a different model. And so we considered a management buyout, and we considered an ESOP. And an ESOP is an employee stock ownership plan, and it's overseen by ERISA and the Department of Labor. It's considered a retirement benefit, although we don't talk about it as a retirement benefit here at StoneAge. And so that was what we decided to do. And it's a very complicated structure, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of money. But ultimately, that's what we did because we decided that broad ownership was what was important to us. We had like 60 some, almost 70 employee shareholders, and we wanted everybody to have the opportunity to own the company in the future as well. So we did that in 2014. It became an ESOP company in 2015, and bought them out 100% at the end of 2022. We did a gradual buyout. So now we are 100% ESOP owned. All the employees own the company, and our founders are off enjoying the fruits of their labors and all the success that they created over the last 45 years.
That is cool. It's taken on a life of its own, and
Yeah.
it's good, and it's amazing to know about these possibilities, right? That these things that can be structured. And what I like a lot about your answers here is that a lot of them are like very like personal, right? You said like, well, there's the machinist, here's this situation, the owners have that situation. It's never like, oh, here's this block, and here's the
No.
structure, and here's these numbers. You're like, hey, there are these people with their individual stories and their needs and what they
Yeah.
have and what they want. And so it's just very, very helpful to think about that in terms of like, hey, there's real people running this and doing the work, and they have feelings just like the rest of us do.
Yep.
And so as far as you and your leadership and your business success and your speaking, like what's the sort of messages that you like to get across? What do you think maybe people don't do very well that you're maybe outspoken about that you think just needs some attention?
So I am a culture creator. I love culture. And it's funny, before COVID, When I would say I'm a very people-oriented, culture-oriented CEO, and I think that's how we have gotten to be so successful as an organization. People would kind of roll their eyes, right? Well, really, are you focused on innovation? Well, yes. Are you focused on finance? Well, yes. But people is my passion. And then when the Great Resignation started to happen, and leaders were really scrambling to try to figure out how do they attract and retain talent, all of a sudden my way of doing things became the way that everybody was trying to figure out how to do things, and that is being a very people centric CEO. And so that's what I speak about. That's what I'm most passionate about. Even though I love innovation, I love disruption, I love changes, and I love business, I do it all through the lens of what is the impact on our people. And so I really appreciate that you said that, that there's all these personal stories, because we're all a collective of our experiences and our stories and how we show up. And that's what makes a culture great or not. So that's the lens that I take everything through is how does this impact our people? Because if you care for your employees and they know that, then they're going to care about doing a better job and taking care of your customers. And we've seen that time and time again. So I speak and write on the ownership mindset. How do you inspire employees to think and act like owners, even if you're not an employee owned company? How do you build teams and cultures of thriving, high performing, high functioning teams so that you can really drive success?
Okay, so we need to be always asking this question: how does it affect our people? And so,
Mhm.
like, what can someone do to up their game if they say, like, I need to be a better manager or leader, and I like what Carrie has to say, and I want to like think and act more like her? Like, what are some actions people can do to get to your level?
Well, first you can get my book, right? The Ownership Mindset, because that is literally what I teach in it is how to lead yourself in this way and then how to lead others in this way. But the first thing I would say is it starts with trust. And I learned that, as we talked about very early in my career as an executive, is that it's all based on trust. And so that's the first thing that I tell managers is, how are you building trust within your team? How are you being trustworthy? How are you trusting others? Because you can't inspire people to speak up, to give feedback, to throw their name in the hat, to take on a new project, to dissent, to debate ideas, if you don't have that trust and that psychological safety. So it always starts with trust. So build those relationships with your team, build that trust, and then you can start to implement some of the other aspects of teaching people how to think and act like owners, which is delegation, delegating authority and decision making, letting people really decide how they're going to work and have more autonomy in their work choices, and still all towards the goal, but where they feel like they have control over their careers, their lives, their livelihoods, their work. And that is what makes people feel like they have purpose and meaning in their jobs.
Okay, so it starts with trust, and then you can delegate, and then that leads to them having the purpose and meaning. And what I like in there, you mentioned about how there was the element of trusting others, but also being trustworthy, right? It goes
Mhm.
both ways, and so that's helpful and interesting to think about. And we need to get that deep dive on that. Get that book, The Ownership Mindset, a handbook for transforming your life and leadership. But then, since this is a podcast, the conflict, the drama is what interests me. And so, do you have like a catastrophic failure of some kind to share? Has there been a point in your career where you were like just panicking, not sure how to proceed, anything like that, as far as just like a failure into success kind of story?
Yeah, I mean, so many. There's two that really come to mind. One, the first one is that we were hacked in 2020, right before COVID, and it was an absolute failure on our part for not having our cybersecurity protocols and technology in place. But me, like many executives at the time, I think you think, oh, I run a small company, like I'm not going to get hacked. And that was incredibly scary. I had never gone through like anything like that before. No one in our company had gone through something like that. Your entire IT systems are down. Our business management software was gone. How do we keep up and running? And so managing through that was incredibly difficult, but also one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. So not only did we have to figure out how to get back up and running, but how do we also ship products to make sure that our customers who need us, we were going into our busiest time of the year, didn't feel a thing. And so there were many days that I felt like, oh God, I don't have what it takes to get through this. This is really hard. We're working long hours. There's so many unknowns. How did I let this happen? Is the board going to fire me because this happened? And ultimately we came together and we got our systems back up and running in 4 weeks. And ultimately it made us a much stronger company. But there were many times where I doubted myself, and it could have been a catastrophic failure. It was a catastrophic failure that luckily we were able to recover from. So that's the first one. The second one is I made a business model change. We went from just making the nozzles that screw on the end of the hose, and we decided that the future is really going to be in automation. And so we need to be able to start developing semi-automated tooling to add to our manual tooling. And I made this huge mistake of thinking that it was the same sort of design process and sales process, and it wasn't. And so we spent a lot of money on product development that ultimately failed because we tried to take on too much and we didn't really hone in our focus and say, we're going to be really good at this. We tried to be really good at everything. And that was a huge lesson for me, is that two things. One, when you're pursuing new businesses, don't try to push it into the old business model. You really have to analyze new business models. So that requires ambidextrous thinking, being able to hold two opposing ideas in your mind at once. Like, this is the core and this is how we used to run it. This is the new business and we're going to have to do things differently. So that was a big lesson that I learned. And then focus. An organization cannot swallow an elephant in one bite. And that is what we did. And it wound up costing us millions of dollars and falling on our faces with a couple of different product launches. And so that was a tough lesson for me to learn. So those are the two. I mean, there's many more, but those are the two big ones that are painful to remember.
And those are great stories, and that's helpful, right? To think about, well, we need to focus, we need to communicate, we need to think some of these things through, and even when there is the failure, then there's just what's the next thing then, right? It's not like the end of the whole company. It's just that particular experiment or project didn't work out, and then we move on to this next part of it. And so also what's great about what you do is you do all this kind of thought leadership, right? You're the CEO, podcast host, author, contributor. And how do you keep your focus with all those sorts of things when you're like, multifaceted and having to do the time management and the task switching and all those things? Like, do you ever sometimes try to talk yourself out of some of the publicity and say, oh, well, this isn't so important? Or do you ever feel like you're like spread too thin? Like, how do you manage all that, and how do you be great in all those areas?
So I follow the 10X models. There's a great book by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. It's called 10X is easier than 2X. And I employ that thinking. And so I always want to go big in everything that I do. And I want to do things that I'm passionate about. And I'm passionate about leadership, building companies, building culture. And I have lots of different ways that I can be able to influence that, whether that's in my own company or helping other companies through my speaking and through my writing. And so how you 10X is you always are pushing yourself to do those bigger things and really go after those goals that you have in your life. And then you build teams around you that can do the other part of it. And so that's what I've done. I've built a phenomenal team. We are growing this company at a great rate where we're not destroying our culture, but we have good, solid growth every year. We're disrupting our industry, but it also allows me to have time to be able to pursue what really brings me joy. And that is studying leadership and speaking about leadership and culture creation and disruption. And so when I'm on fire and I'm passionate and really it all comes together because it's all really about how do you build great teams and great companies. It allows me to be able to do those things and still be able to build the business. So I highly recommend any leader who wants to be thinking bigger and has dreams that they want to pursue is read that book. 10x is easier than 2x, and I think it really will inspire you to figure out how can you go after your goals and build a team around you that can do the work that they are passionate about, that allows you to be able to do the things that you're passionate about.
That's amazing. So you built the team that can help you get to where you go, and then you use your passion to keep the drive moving forward. And so,
Exactly.
since this is the Scaling Secrets podcast, you already shared some cool scaling secrets. But what do you think deserves attention as far as maybe these companies that they're worried that they're not scaling fast enough or not doing it in the right way? And like, you've learned all these things through all of your ups and downs, trial and error. So what do you have to share with us today as far as just scaling secrets?
So, in my opinion, all those other people like that we do things for, they don't matter, right? I'm not scaling fast enough. I'm not doing the right way. Like, don't get those things in your mind. It's so easy to start to compare yourself to other companies. And I've fallen into that too. I mean, great. I've been running this company for 18 years and we've doubled every 4 or 5 years. That's fantastic growth. But when you see, people who are going into unicorn status in 5 years, you're like, well, am I not doing it right? Am I not a great CEO? And that is nonsense thinking. And so my first piece of advice is look at your business and absolutely look at how you want to scale, but do not compare yourself to other people and say, I'm not doing this the right way, because you've got to build your company and your niche and your market in a way that makes sense for your niche and your market. And that does not necessarily look at going from 10 million to 100 million or a billion in some really short time frame. So make sure that your scaling makes sense for you. And it doesn't mean that you don't have those 10x goals. I want to turn StoneAge into $1 billion company too. But I'm doing it very methodically in a way that makes sense for StoneAge and not comparing it to what other people are doing. So that's my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is you've got to have that vision. If you want to scale, you have to know where you want to go. And that's something that I think that we've done really well at StoneAge. Our vision for StoneAge Tools portion of our business is to have working industrial cleaning robotics in every major heavy manufacturing facility around the world by 2040. That's a really big goal. And, but it keeps us focused. It keeps everybody understanding where we're going, and it helps us make really tough decisions about what we invest our time and money into. And so that vision is really important. So what's your big vision, and use it to drive your decision making, to analyze trade-offs, and to help you think big and go big in a way that makes sense for you and your company.
Those are both very helpful pieces of advice. Comparison is the thief of joy, basically.
Yes.
And then also, if you don't have a target, you won't hit it. And so, we just met in this podcast. So I don't know you and I don't know your company very well, but you know yourself and your company super well. And so, is there a missing question in our conversation? If I knew you, Carrie Siggins, and StoneAge better, and I just asked like the most amazing, perfect question that just really like showcased your greatness, what would I be asking you?
Oh gosh. Oh, that's a good question.
It's like a question within a question,
I
right?
know, right? Maybe this is something that's a little bit different, but so I ask this question when I interview people, and it's what drives people crazy about you, and and so I think maybe that would be a fun one to ask, like what drives people crazy about me, and I think that what drives people crazy about me is that constant intense drive that I have to move forward, to try new things, to really disrupt, and it can be exhausting, and it inspires me every day. It's what gets me up in the morning. It's what allows me to do a large amount of work. I have a huge capacity to take on a tremendous amount of work, and very, very little stresses me out. But I think that that's hard for people. People don't move at the same pace that I move at, and I had to learn that at a really young age, and figure out how to be able to moderate myself so that I was a good leader, not a leader that just drives and drives and drives people crazy and to exhaustion and burnout. That keeps it fun and keeps it inspiring, but keeps it manageable as well.
So you're adaptable, in other words, right?
Yes.
You can turn on the fire hose, the water blaster, and you can go a million miles a minute. But then it's like if you and someone else are walking down the street, you kind of have to slow yourself down to
Exactly.
their pace, so that way you're including them as well. And that's a sign of like maturity, adultness, growth,
Yes.
and all that sort of thing. But you can turn it on when you want to, and that's good, because that's a problem too, right? If you're just on full blast all the time and you can't calm down, like there's some work to be done there if that is the case. And so you mentioned there about your kind of your interviewing and your podcasting, and I'm going to steal that question in the future, by the way. What drives other people crazy about you? But tell us about this podcast. Who do you talk to, and what's the topic?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Reflect Forward, Conversations on Leadership. And I have a cadence where one week I interview a leader and we dive into their particular passion or focus on leadership. And then in the other weeks, I do a solo episode where I give actionable tips and takeaways on a particular leadership topic. And so that works for me because I am a busy CEO. I can't interview 52 people a year. That's way too much, but I can do 10, 15-minute solo episodes that address the kinds of questions that I get all the time. So I get a really great feedback on it, and it's always actionable. There's always tips to be able to take away that you can put into practice right then in the moment. So that's what my podcast is about.
And that sort of variety helps everybody, right? It helps
Mhm.
you because you get out what you want, but then when you're listening, you kind of have it keeps you from falling asleep, right? It's always
Exactly.
something unexpected, but also very
Yes.
valuable. And is there like a number one episode, like your favorite one, or if someone were to jump into this, is there like, okay, listen to this one before the others and you'll be completely blown away?
Yeah. So I just actually had a recent podcast that I got great feedback on, and it was the power of compounding in success. And so I took a spin on how we look at the power of compounding, and it being, as Warren Buffett calls it, or I'm sorry, as Albert Einstein called it, the holy grail of wealth building. But really, you can do that same thing for yourself as you're looking at how do you build upon your skills and your talents to compound your own success. And so I got tremendous amount of feedback on that one. And I think it gives really great ideas for people who are looking for ways to improve and who maybe are feeling like, oh, like it's not happening fast enough. It gives just really great tips on that. And then I have so many fantastic interviews, but I think my favorite one was with a gal named Gina Schaefer. And she actually has an ESOP as well. I interview lots of people, not just ESOP companies, but her story is so cool. She bought, I think up to like 13, 11, between like 11, 12, 13 Ace hardware store franchises and combine them into one and turn it into an ESOP. But she focused on building her businesses in communities that needed to be, that were going through regentrification. And she hired ex-convicts to help them have a new chance at building a better life for themselves. And she has this amazing, amazing story of how many people's lives she has helped turn around because of her compassion and her vision and support of reintegration of convicted felons into her business. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. And I love her so much. And I just think everybody should hear it. They'd be inspired to think about how they run their business and how they treat their employees a little bit differently.
And I'm inspired, and I haven't even heard this story. And so, like you're just telling us how helpful it is to get in other people's heads, right? You've been telling us about like, well, these different employees, these different people you interview, and so that's just that really sticks with me, right? They say things like, well, you should like read such and such biography because that way it's more entertaining, it's more fun. You're not just learning the step by step. You're figuring out like, hey, here's these problems this person tackled, and here's how they thought it through, and here's just some of these possibilities. And like, even if we personally are not opening up these Ace Hardware stores, just to know about, hey, this can be done with an ESOP, and this can be done as far as like the change in the community and doing good in the world. It's just like, it's a nice way to simultaneously give your brain a break, but also be thinking in new and different ways. And so it's a cool idea. And that's what the true magic of podcasting is, right? Of just
Yes.
to jump into these bite-sized stories, and it doesn't feel like school, doesn't feel like learning or work, but then it gives you these amazing results and keeps you on your A game and gives you that edge and all those other businessy buzzwords. And so what are some next steps here? If someone says, well, I'm really impressed with the idea of StoneAge as a company and this podcast and this book and Kerry as a person, where should someone go after listening to our interview?
So you can find everything about me on my website, carriesiggins.com. You can find my podcast there. You can find the book there. You can book me if you want to talk about a speaking opportunity there. If you want to learn more about StoneAge, you can go to stoneagetools.com or stoneageholdings.com, which is actually my holding company. We've got a couple of other businesses in there as well. And so that's where you can learn more. And on the stoneageholdings.com website, we also have a lot about ESOPs and really what that vision is. So if you're interested in learning more about employee ownership, that's a great place to go to see how we look at employee ownership and teaching our employees how to think and act like owners.
Well, you're on the path to world domination and that billion-dollar company and being in all the locations by 2040. So StoneAgeTools.com, StoneAgeHoldings.com, and KerrySiggins.com. That's KerrySiggins.com. Go there if you want some different results, some different thinking, some different actions to be a better person, to be a better leader, to make this positive corporate change happen. And as people are going to one of those 3 locations, perhaps KerrySiggins.com, I'd like to get to the part where I stump you a little bit, but hopefully not too much, and I ask for a fun quote or lesson that can really stick with us, get us excited, and send us on our way. So what comes to mind, Kerry, as far as a fun quote or lesson to wrap this up?
So this is my favorite quote, and it's by Dr. Hassan, who is the chairman of the board of trustees for American International University in Bangladesh. And he is just a brilliant thought leader. And I love what he says. He says, excellence is a gradual result of always striving to do better. It's never an accident, rather the result of relentless efforts, committed perseverance, and the vision to transform obstacles into opportunities. And I feel like that's been the story of my life. And I love it because I think consistency is the most underrated leadership trait that we have. But if you are always striving to just do a little bit better than you did the day before, then you can achieve excellence. And I just think that's a really powerful quote.
I agree. It is. It's powerful. It's helpful. That's what I strive to do. That's what you strive to do as well.
Yeah.
And I think our listeners in addition. So KerrySiggins.com is the place to go. We've been chatting with Carrie Siggins from StoneAge Water Blast Tools and equipment for industrial cleaning. So check out what she has to offer, especially that excellent book, The Ownership Mindset. And thank you very much, Kerry, for stopping by and just dispensing like 10 podcast episodes worth of helpful information. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Robert. I enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.